Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome back to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm Brooke Ashley.
I'm Justin Bowling.
And we have a guest tonight, my buddy Dustin Keith. He is my partner in crime, although that's probably not a great explanation of what we are to the Episcopal Church. But he's my brethren, I guess you could say, and he is Lebanon's favorite patriot, Dustin Keith.
Thank you very much. So happy to be making my debut appearance on Appalachian Liturgy. And I do like to get in, as Congressman John Lewis would like to say, some good trouble.
I call it holy mischief.
I need
Amen.
a
Like
word,
it.
apparently.
I like it. Good trouble. That's good. All right. So this week we have decided that we're going to talk about patriotism in Christianity. And I think I want to start us off by something that happened last week. So the RNC was last week, and a lot went down there. But specifically, one thing that Mike Pence said, I think, encompasses this entire topic for us. So I'm just going to give that quote really quick. Quote, "So let's run the race marked out for us. Let's fix our eyes on Old Glory and all she represents. Fix our eyes on this land of heroes and let their courage inspire. Let's fix our eyes on the author and the perfecter of our faith and freedom, and never forget that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That means freedom always wins." Quote, Mike Pence. So if you don't recognize that, that is basically Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, and he just changed some words. Replace Jesus in one case to Old Glory. So, yeah, that should get us started on a conversation.
The whole point.
I
How do we feel about that?
don't even know where to start. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think that the American church. Okay, so you'll know exegesis is reading scripture with keeping the context in mind, right? So eisegesis is the opposite. Eisegesis is interpreting scripture through your own eyes and in your own circumstances, which, I mean, there's a time and a place that we need to apply to our own lives. This to me just screams of imperialism, and of that eisegesis. You know, we have kind of said, hey, America is the promised land, and I have a problem with that.
Yeah, and I think, like, historically, you can always see people who have tried to kind of associate a specific nation or country as, like, especially in the New Testament, like as God's chosen country. Like, you see that all throughout the past 2,000 years of Christian history. And there's always going to be that danger. And I think the thing that seems the scariest about that is exactly what you said, Justin, like the idea of, like, the party's quote from Hebrews says, let's fix our eyes upon God. And in this case, it says, let's fix our eyes upon Old Glory or the country. And it's kind of like equating your country and God, and maybe kind of muddying the waters there on what's worship of country and what's worship of God type thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is just another example of, especially Mike Pence, but also the Republican Party at large, seeming to, stake some sort of claim on Christianity, and speak directly to that audience when, there is no political party of Christianity. There is no claim that can be made. You can believe in Jesus, and you can still want to, carry out policy-wise the ideals that are found throughout the Bible about taking care of one another, having pride in your people and in your country, but also understanding that there are more important things like caring for your fellow man than any one nation.
So something Brooke said is the idea that we have turned America into, somewhat of an Israel. Like we think that we are the promised land. Where does that stem from? Like why do we have a theology shaped to believe that America is somehow the promised land?
Honestly, I think it goes back to the Great Awakening period of time. There was this big spiritual reawakening in the New World, and then from that came this desire to have reawakenings in other places. So there was then followed up by this huge missionary movement of sending North American people all across the world to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. But when you look at that, not only were they spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it was the Americanized version of that. So instead of making it contextual, they were going to great expense in America and getting people to dress like the people in America did. And I think it was probably during some of that time that we started confusing the gospel message with the American way of life. And so we were trying to spread both, if you will.
Yeah, and I think I like that idea that it really took off in the late 19th century type thing. That's where that iteration of it kind of took its current form. But I think also throughout all of Christian history, we've had a hard time with what the relationship of our faith with our nations should be. You can see like in Rome, when Rome became an officially Christian nation, was about the same time that Rome started falling, and people just couldn't understand it. They couldn't wrap their mind around the idea that hey, we're really worshiping the true God. Why is he letting us fall? And then after that, you get all of the Middle Ages where there's this really weird, complex relationship between, like church and state and who knows what it is. And then eventually, once we get past the Enlightenment, we get to what you're talking about. Like we get this nation state idea where people see these, their official state religion, and that's the official way you need to go out and evangelize to make it in a mirror image of what your state is. So like, I think it's a problem that Christianity has struggled with the whole time we've been here, and it just kind of takes different forms depending on what the political realities is in the world at the time.
So I also think, I don't think it's bad for us to want our country to be a Christian state, not necessarily politically, but for folks to know Jesus and for us to reflect that in our everyday activities. But throughout American history, you've seen this meshing of whatever the flavor of Christianity was that was popular, changing moral laws. And I think where we really get into trouble is when we try to legislate morality from whatever religious standpoint. And I think we're on a pendulum. Sometimes we're swinging one way really hard and then we swing back the other way, but we can't seem to kind of find that middle groove there.
So I have a book from Kevin Cruz, and I was trying to think the title of it. But it's basically on the Christian nation, the idea that America is a Christian nation and where that came from. And in the book, he basically pinpoints a specific, era that when we really adopted the idea that we were a Christian nation, and it was in the 50s. And he kind of credits the Eisenhower administration and then the revival with Billy Graham and all those things that were going on during that time as the moment that we really adopted Christianity as our religion for the government and for political purposes. And that a lot of our currency, that's when we added it during that time, was In God We Trust in the 50s. Also, I think that's when we added God to the pledge, was in the 50s as well. So I think a lot of people don't really realize that it was that modern of a construction. We just assumed that the pledge has always had that, but it hasn't. So I think that's maybe the latest adoption or implementation of the idea that this is a Christian nation. But in my mind, I prefer America to be a Christian nation by its actions, not by its mottos or its signing on to certain pledges. And because the way I feel about it is when the government and when politicians start using Christianity in their campaigns, which is what Mike Pence did, I feel it's abuse of the religion. I personally think it's an attack. It's some kind of misrepresentation of what Christianity is. And I do find it offensive, and that's why I typically prefer, I don't have anything against, like, I wouldn't mind a candidate who is an atheist. Like, if they align with what I would see as Christ's teachings in terms of policies and actions, I would absolutely vote for an atheist. I would have no problem with that. Over a Christian, I would vote for. So that's just me. Like, I prefer action over any kind of mottos.
I think there are no doubt a lot of parallels between what we consider to be the tenets of Christianity and then the values of America, right? So we think about wholesome American values, what defines us as a people, what defines us as a nation, then who is a patriot? And I thought of, this is someone who serves, this is someone who provides selfless service to others. A patriot is someone who makes sacrifices, someone who is willing to give up something from themselves to benefit others. Then you think about opportunities, right? A patriot looks for opportunities to make improvements, right? The opportune time to make a change. You have all of those that are connected with bravery and perseverance. And so you think, well, who exemplifies those sorts of values? And you think of Jesus Christ. Certainly, he sacrificed everything. He served others with his whole heart, and he created opportunity, right? He created a new covenant with us and used the opportunity to show love to the entire world. So I think there are certainly parallels, right? So America was even founded as, a new hope, right? Come to America, escape, whatever persecution you're facing in Europe. There is prosperity here. There is a chance for a new life in America, which is exactly kind of what Israel was hoping for. So there are no doubt opportunities or parallels between Christianity and being an American patriot. But that has been so perverted by what we're seeing today. And just like you said, taking, using your Christian faith as a political tool and using it that way is an abuse, for sure.
So I'm going to push back a little bit. I think you can be a patriot to a country, especially in the United States, and not be a follower of Christ. I think of a patriot for a country, as someone who's willing to defend that country and that country's way of life, and I have tons of family members that are doing that every day. And so I think of them as patriots. I think of their family as patriots. I just wonder when did the word patriot be derogatory in one sense? And I think that in our current climate, even within the church, we've elevated that patriot and we've intermeshed that with good Christian person, right?
Yeah.
We have meshed that together. And for me as a clergy person, it has become disturbing over the last, I'll say 8, 9, 10 years to watch people confuse their relationship with Jesus Christ with their relationship with a political party, whichever one it is. I've seen it on both sides. And for me, that's a really tough conversation to have. And I think there are some people who are starting to realize that. Because I think when you break down both, I think as a follower of Christ, we should see things in both parties that we probably don't jive with. And things in both parties that we could say, hey, that's scriptural too, and I think we really get into trouble when we paint one political party or people who follow one political party as true Christians or devout or, for me, that is our biggest issue right now in the church. For years, I have kept political opinions to myself because I alienate half of my church if my political opinions are known. And my job as a clergy person is to bring people closer to Christ and to facilitate that relationship. And unfortunately, that means that a lot of my political ideals and opinions have to be silenced to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's very problematic because our relationship with Christ should be challenging our prior established political opinions, whatever they may be. We should be, looking for the good of our neighbor and trying to love our neighbor, but we also should be questioning, positions we may have held prior to, growing closer to Christ and, growing in those. But instead, lots of times I think I definitely find myself guilty of it as well, but we want to take our political opinions and read it onto Christ or read it onto scripture and see ourselves in it. We want to look at it more as a mirror rather than, something that transforms us.
So let me throw this out there. I think as the church, we have given up some of our authority to the government. And what I will say about that is, even in America, let's go back 80 years, right? The driving force for all social justice, whether that was feeding programs or care of immigrants or care of the poor or housing, all of that was being done by Christians in this country. And we see that big change happen in the Depression era. And we started developing these government programs. And as the church, collectively, we didn't do enough and haven't until recently, in my opinion, really started reaching out to love neighbor. And that has caused a lot of friction, in the last 20 years in the church.
Yeah, I think, I think what's going on there is before we had all these, big social programs in the government, the church, obviously felt called that we have to help the needy. We have to support the poor, the widows. This is our calling to do. But then once we did start getting these social programs, there is such a, I think there is such a belief of separation of church and state now. I think everybody's buying into it in some form or fashion, that once the state takes over, well, now the church cannot have anything to do with that. Either they see it, you see it in a negative light that I don't want the church to be involved in the state because of this separation of church and state idea. Or, the state is secular and the church can't be involved in that because, we don't want to muddy our hands. So I think that's what's going on. Is that's why we gave up so much power. When, in my mind, yes, the church should be using the government. I don't mind at all that the church would think that they can use the government to fulfill some of these social programs that are needed.
Absolutely. Mhm.
But
Can
we
the
should
government
see.
use the church?
Well, that's a good question.
Because
I almost
I
would.
think it should be a two-way street.
Yeah, right. I do too, and I would almost say yes.
So
Now,
I can tell you from experience, that is a difficult road to walk.
Yep.
We have, as religious groups, received federal grant money before. And now this was years ago, but we were under such strict guidelines, and people were so afraid of crossing that church and state line that when we went in and we were working on behalf of whatever this federal grant was, we could not even wear a jewelry that proclaimed Christianity at all. So I would have to remove, if I had a cross on, I had to remove that. So remember when I talked about this pendulum swinging, that was it. To me, that was one extreme. Now I've seen that swing back. But I think it's difficult, and because I think the church has abused some of the power that it's had, we've had our toes stomped a little bit
right.
on that. So
Well, this whole idea to, to keep, I guess, being tax exempt, and so we have to walk a short line to make sure that we stay tax exempt. I do wonder, I know it might hurt financially, but what if we weren't tax exempt, and then you can just blend it as much as you want? Is that a solution, or is that just more problematic?
So I can tell you that over the last 20, 25 years, that tax exempt status has really changed. So it used to be, as a religious organization, if you were tax exempt, you could purchase anything without paying tax on it. That is not the case anymore. It has to be, it's a very thin line of what you can use and what you can do. And, some of our churches are 501c3s. There's a bunch of different categories there of, quote, nonprofit, right? Some more latitude, we don't get as much tax credit now for donating money to our churches. But, and maybe that's a good thing. From a clergy standpoint, I don't want you giving money to your religious organization because you're going to get a tax credit. Right. I want you to give the money because you're called to give the money. Hey, if you get a tax credit, great. But I don't want that to be the reason that you do that. So I'm not sure that most clergy people keep their mouth shut on political issues or political candidates.
No, I'm not convinced on it. I'm not convinced that they keep their mouth shut anyway. I think that there's a lot more going on.
I would argue that an ethical clergy person probably should.
Even if they do, even if they do in the church, I'm just going to, even if they do in the church, if they have Facebook or social media and they start sharing it, then what's the line there? Because you are a pastor, you're a preacher, you are making statements that seems,
So on my social media, you will never, ever see me support one candidate or another. And by what I share, a lot of people would think I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. I'm not a registered Democrat, But what makes it really tough is when you have a church person come in, and as church people, we need to be careful about this. They demand to know from their pastor who they're voting for. And I've seen it, and it's not okay.
So one question about that, like, is there, I feel a little icky about saying like somebody shouldn't be able to post opinions on Facebook, because that feels a lot like telling, LeBron to be quiet and dribble.
Hmm.
Like stick to his game and do that, and don't spew your political position somewhere else. Something like stick to preaching and do whatever there. But when you come on Facebook, don't do it there. Is there a difference, or am I missing something?
No, I think it has to be a personal choice. So for
Yeah.
me, what I want people to do is always think about what they're saying or what they're posting or what they're thinking in light of Jesus's teachings.
Yeah, and
And
I
so-
definitely get the practical argument against like maybe you should think about it before you do it. I was just thinking about like whether it was against your tax exempt or something you can't do, that type of direction.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, we have some well-known preachers in this country who pretty
Yeah.
much are just running political rallies in their worship services every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I think in those situations, I think that it's perfectly okay to say, you can't be tax exempt and do this because you, in a sense, are a de facto political whatever organization. I think churches should, if they're going to have one political candidate come in, they should at least offer and truly offer the other side to that, whatever that is, instead of just kind of doing it on the slide and knowing that person's really not welcome.
Yeah, that was actually going to be a question that I had is what do y'all think of politicians using churches as venues to talk about issues? Because that seems to happen quite a bit.
I think it really,
What do you think, Dustin?
it depends a lot on the context. If a politician perhaps is speaking in his or her own church, that may be one thing. But if you're actually on the campaign trail, targeting and visiting different churches throughout the entire country, that doesn't seem to be very appropriate.
So I think the church is a great place to have local candidates come in and talk from all the different perspectives. And honestly, I don't know where else in our communities that's going to happen. So I'm okay with that. I am not okay with a church being used for a political rally.
Yeah.
We have lots of Methodist churches that are used as polling places. I'm okay with that too. I mean, I think that we can do that both and. It doesn't have to be in either a secular place or a sacred place. Like there can be that mix. But what I don't like to see is the church, whoever's in leadership, inviting the candidate that they like to come and speak and not give equal time to all those political folks.
Yeah, I think if it's a true dialogue, if it's a discussion, for instance, we've got a great recovery program hosted here at the Lebanon United Methodist Church, Recovery at Lebanon, and we've had different elected officials, state level, elected officials come and just sit and observe and listen, and that really was quite humbling to me to see someone just come in to listen, not to speak, but to observe and see what the process was like for someone in recovery seeking help and seeking communion with others. So I think there is a time and a place for sure that can be very beneficial.
It's that eternal complication that Christianity's had, like that. Pope Benedict says in Charity and Truth that to desire the common good and to strive towards it is a requirement of justice and charity. So we have that requirement as being a Christian to work for the good of others. But at the same time, when Jesus was, dealing with issues between Israel and Rome at the time, he says give unto Caesar what's Caesar and unto God what's God. And then people wrongly choose that Barabbas instead of Jesus. We see that portrayed in the Bible. That was making the wrong choice, was to conflate your faith and your politics so closely that way. So it's like what Brooke was saying, it's a both and, but it's not very clear how we're supposed to work that out. And it's probably because it's a complicated question is going to vary based on situation.
That's a good point. I've actually heard that verse, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, used for separation of church and state a lot.
Yeah.
So, and you can view it that way, like, but I've also heard it mentioned, like, interpreted that Jesus was like double speaking. He was saying, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, but Caesar don't own anything. Everything's God's. So I like that interpretation now.
Yeah.
So one other thing I wanted to bring up. So I remember from my childhood when I was attending Bible school that one of the things that we would do every day that we would go to Bible school is we would say pledges. There would be the pledge to the Bible, there would be pledge to the flag, to the Christian flag, and there would be pledge to the American flag.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, as a kid, I'd never thought anything about that. I've never thought anything about that until as of late, really. But I do question that whole pledging to the American flag in a church. Is that appropriate? Is that the appropriate place for that? Not from a separation of church and state aspect. I'm not worried about that. Just from a kingdom aspect, from a Christian aspect, should we, like, can we in good faith do that? Or is that somehow, trampling on our idea of being citizens of heaven?
So I want to push back a little bit on the Pledge of Allegiance to the Bible, for one.
Okay.
So
we're going to lose all our viewers now.
I know, right here, and I'm, my email. I feel like, we don't have cable, so we've been watching lots of Tool Time, and so Al holds up this sign that says Tim Al or whatever at PO Box blah 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 blah. I feel like I just need to go ahead and hold up my email address right now.
There's going to be a complaint section.
I know, it's bad. It's going to get ugly. So we have talked about this. We believe that the Bible is inspired by God. It is what our faith is based upon, the life of Jesus. That's Holy Scripture. But I think as Appalachians, specifically, we have made an idol out of the actual physical Bible. In that, I have folks who, even if a Bible comes through the thrift store in a donation that has obviously been in a flood and it smells like sewage, will not throw it away because they feel like this big curse is going to be put on them because they've thrown the physical pages of that Bible away. So have we made that an idol?
I like the comparison because I think it shows that you can make anything that's not God an idol, no matter how good it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually is the perfect response to that question. Like, I think patriotism is great. I don't even have a problem with saying the pledge at all or anything like that. But, trying to conflate those two things together so closely, I think is dangerous. And yeah, I agree with that. You can. And I've definitely seen people that have made an idol out of even Scripture itself. So yeah, I think there's potentially a pastoral reason why you may want to limit those, to answer your question, Justin, but it's really going to be situational. I think, like, if it feels wrong to the pastor, they might be right in making that decision, not to do that. But if they know people are able to see the difference, then maybe it's okay. I do find it funny too that a lot of the people who are okay with pledging to the flag, having a flag up at in Bible school on the stage, would probably cringe to no end if they saw a statue of Mary sitting there right beside the stage. So
I was getting ready to bring that up, because I would even go as far as to say that if there was statues of military personnel in any of our churches, for whatever reason we decided to decorate our church, maybe it's at a military base or something, and there's a chapel and there's statues and stuff, I would bet that these same people would not have a problem at all with that. But then if you have a statue to Mary or any of the saints, well, we might as well burn it down, you know?
Selective
So-
iconoclasm.
What I want folks to hear us saying is that we are not anti-American. I mean, we have a lot of freedoms to be able to sit here and discuss this. We have the freedoms to worship as we please, whether that is in a Catholic church or a Methodist church or the Episcopalian church, and part of that is because it's where we live, right? So I think that we should be thankful for that, and thankful for that freedom. But I think we need to be really careful in saying that because we have this freedom that we are somehow specially blessed by God. And I think that is where some of the conflicts between in the mixing of Christianity and patriotism. I'm not a huge fan of having flags of any nation in our sanctuary unless we are talking about the world church and that we are showing all, I think there are times and places in worship that we can show flags of all these different countries where the church is alive and well and existing. And I think that broadens our minds, especially as Americans, to know that Christianity is alive and well in places that don't fly the old glory, that Christianity can be alive and well. As a pastor, I would prefer not to have the American flag down front in my sanctuary. So again, here's my email address.
I like the way you put that too, but the part about I don't think it's saying anything bad about the country or anything like that, because, if you lived in a country that everybody thought was terrible, I don't think there's as much of a risk as conflating that with your religion. You're going to see that these are very different things. But, it's because we do believe that we live in a great country that it's easy to conflate those things. And I do think it's important to call people out when they do, no matter, whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them. And it's important that we do it on both, because otherwise, we're basically doing the same type of thing. We're selectively choosing where we see issues with it. But yeah.
So that was one of the I guess the final points that I was going to bring up is, how is it that we can actually be patriotic? And I think you all touched on it, but it's not necessarily bad to be patriotic. We can't, I think what happens is when your patriotism turns to nationalism, that's when it really becomes an idol and there's an issue. Because when it turns to nationalism, you not only see yourself as a shining city on a hill, but you start seeing everyone else as being something below that. And we have a worldwide church. There's Christians in every nation now, and we have to think of them. It's like one of the things with the Israel-Palestine conflict. We need to see that there's Christians in Palestine too. when we come up with policies or things that we support, I would think that we should want to protect Christians. Those are our brothers and sisters. So, I think that is the point. Just don't let it become a nationalist idea.
Well, bring up the city on the hill imagery. I think for a long time we've held up America, the country, as the city on the hill, a beacon of hope and light, which in a lot of ways it is. I mean, when you think about opportunity and that kind of stuff, but we've conflated that with a little bit with the freedom of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I don't know that it is our country's responsibility to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it is our churches, and our churches are meant to be a city on a hill, not our country.
Yeah. So
And just in the same way that there are so many different ways to demonstrate your faith, there are so many different ways to demonstrate your patriotism. There is not one way to show patriotism. You can choose to serve in the military, but you can also choose to go register voters, or you can volunteer your time at a food pantry, whatever it might be. There's not necessarily one way to show your patriotism. We need to be more open and tolerant of ways that different Americans show their patriotism, to celebrate that and not tear people down because they choose to display it differently than you do.
That's a good point too.
Yeah, you could be patriotic and support a war, and also be patriotic by protesting that war.
Sure.
I want to shoehorn this quote in, so I'm going to do it there. But I had a quote from G.K. Chesterton, who he wrote a little small treatise called On Defense of Patriotism, and he had a couple things that I liked in there. All earthly considerations, that nothing upon earth shall go without its due appreciation. And then he kind of warns against some of the dangers of it by saying, my country, right or wrong, is a thing that no patriot would ever think of saying, except in a desperate case. It's like saying, my mother, drunk or sober. No doubt, if a decent man's mother took to drink, he would share in her troubles to the last. But to talk as if she would be in a state of difference as to whether his mother took to drink is not certainly the language of men who know the great mystery. That being that, being a patriot doesn't mean that your country, is always right in everything it does, or that somebody's always right in showing their love of their country in a certain way. But instead, it means we go through the troubles of trying to make it a better place, kind of what you're saying, Dustin, whatever that may look like. But we're going to follow it through, and, we're going to love our country in that way. The same way you might say, I have the best sister in the world, isn't like saying that everybody else's sisters is just inferior to mine. It's just kind of like saying, you have a very special connection to that, and you wouldn't choose anything differently.
Yep, I like that, and I like what Brooke said about the church being the shining city on the hill, because once from the church's standpoint, we should be bringing people to Christ from the bottom up. We should be coming from a low standpoint. Whereas if the government's doing it, if a country's doing it, it's by force, in some form or fashion. It's by force, and I don't think that the gospel spreads that way. Or it shouldn't.
Yeah. I agree. And I think when we mix this idea of patriotism or nationalism with Christianity, we get a much weaker version of Christianity. And I don't know that we make disciples of Christ. I think we make followers of this mixture that falls apart really quickly. Because what happens if all of a sudden, we have a downturn as a country? I mean, are we, it causes problems.
Yeah. Sky Jatani, he did a tweet last week, and he said that you wrap Jesus in an American flag, and then you remove Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. This is another topic for another day, but any Protestant church in Appalachia has what I call the scary Jesus picture. And it is this Caucasian Jesus with blue eyes, and he's staring at you kind of like this, But for so many people, they've had such a hard time understanding that Jesus wasn't American. He wasn't white, and I think that's a good place to start when you're really starting to break down this idea of nationalism in Christianity, is that the person that we are following, that we are pledging our lives to follow, was not American.
It's good to keep in mind. All right. So I guess now we will move on to our top 5. So, segue. Appalachian Liturgy Top 5 Debate. To our top 5. All right. So we can credit Dustin Keith for this topic. Ask him to come up.
Can you put his
something.
email address up too?
Yeah, there's going to be another complaint box for this one. So I guess to show our patriotism, we are top 5 countries that we would like to live that's not the United States. So I'm going to put Dustin Keith's email right here.
This was actually kind of hard for me.
It was.
It was somewhat difficult. I knew the countries. Not that I've thought about it, but I've thought about it. And so
I knew immediately.
I knew immediately, but I just didn't know what order and the reasoning. The reasoning was kind of hard for me. So, Dustin Keith, we will let you go first.
Absolutely. So I will start out by saying that my list was also very difficult to compile. I mean, I had a rather large list that I had to compile down, and it was not hard to think of excellent countries that have robust culture or a natural, beautiful, landscape or environment. There are very beautiful places on Earth that are not in America that have just fantastic people. Um, so I'll start out with number 5. That's how we do it, right? We go up from the bottom.
Bottom up.
Deal. Number 5 is Norway. Norway has excellent centralized health care. They're a beautiful country up in the northern hemisphere. And we had an exchange student from Norway in Abingdon through the Rotary Club. And he was just a delight. Excellent representative for Norway. Moving up to number 4 was France. France, a great ally of the United States. They have fantastic food. French food is probably one of my favorites.
I love French fries.
Yeah, they definitely came from France. So
French
chalk that up. French food, and then the people. It is the country of love. They have the beautiful French Riviera in the south of France. Number 3, our neighbor to the north, our dear friends in Canada. Canada, of course, is probably the most similar as far as the style and structure of government, and in a lot of different ways culturally to America. So Canada would be a great place to live, especially up in Saskatchewan. Saskatoon is my favorite Canadian city. Number 2 is New Zealand. New Zealand has an excellent prime minister. They were able to quickly contain COVID and go down to 0 cases, reopen their schools. They have a beautiful landscape, really nice, kind people there in New Zealand. The number 1 country I would live in outside of the U.S., a place that I was supposed to be traveling to later this month, but the trip was canceled due to COVID. Iceland. Iceland. Not a lot of people.
Iceland.
Iceland. That's right. Very small population, but they are, I believe, kind of ranked as the happiest country on Earth. They are 100% powered by renewable energy, most of which is geothermal coming up from the Earth. They have geysers and waterfalls and mountains and amazing fish and shark and skyr. Skyr is like an Icelandic yogurt, cheese, dairy thing. It just sounds great. So
I will correct you. I will correct you on the happiest country on earth, because they are not. Because I actually looked that up to determine some of my list. So I will correct you when I go over my list. You want me to go next?
I was gonna say, it sounds like a segue into your list.
Yeah, segue to my list. Okay, so my number 5 is as Dustin mentioned, Canada, and it's for the same reasons. Thank you for the prop, Dustin. It's still in North America, and it is the closest thing that we have, to our government. So it wouldn't be a big change at all. I could probably even transfer and keep my same job.
Ooh, yeah, I didn't even think of that.
Right, you could just transfer. So it would be an easy transition. So that had to be, on my list, and it's my number 5. My number 4 is Sweden.
Nice.
Yes, and the reasoning is I've been watching a lot of videos lately on Sweden, like Americans in Sweden and whatnot, and it's a beautiful place. But that is really the reason. Like, you'll notice that there's Nordic countries on my list, but that, and apparently 80% of Swedish people no English. So they are bilingual. That's an easy transition. Like I probably won't have to, do anything when I go there. So that's my number 4. Also, the what is the fish called that's in a can?
Swedish fish.
No, it's a heron. It's the stinkiest fish on earth.
Oh,
Apparently,
I've seen that
You know,
on
it's like a
Food
challenge.
Network. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's apparently
Um,
has like sit in vinegar for like years or something.
it
and
does.
It's like
Yeah, and there's gases and stuff that builds up, and when you open it up, it sprays everywhere. And
If you want to do this,
I would like to try it, honestly.
Yeah.
it's
Pickled
supposedly a delicacy, but I think from what I understand, it's like just told that to tourists.
Yeah. So, from my understanding, no one actually likes it in
Yeah.
Sweden. They just do it for tradition now, because before refrigeration was a thing, that's how they canned it and kept it fresh or whatever. So now it's just tradition, but no one actually likes it. So I would try that. Sour heron is the English translation of that.
It just
So-
sounds delicious.
It does. My number 3, and this is the happiest country on earth based
Nope.
on
Dispute it.
2019 polling. I didn't look at 2020.
Fake
2019.
news.
nobody's
Uh,
happy in 2020.
That's right. There's
This
no
is the
polls in
least
2020.
sad place on earth.
And that is Finland. And honestly, it's really because of the poll that I put this on here. They have obviously universal health care and all of the perks that I want the United States to have, they have in social programs. So I just decided, hey, let's choose a bunch of Norwegian countries, and there we go. So that's my number 3. My number 2, and I went from my number 2 and number 1 with heritage. So my number 2 is Scotland. And so, I did the ancestry DNA, and, part of my heritage is from Scotland. That's really the only reason why it's my number 2. Like, I would love to go and see some of the Edinburgh and all those places. But my number 1 is because of heritage and because of the Anglican Church, and that's England.
Oh,
that-
wow.
Yeah. I think that's where if I had to move for whatever reason, I would want it to be England, because of the Anglican Church, and then maybe I can trace down some of my ancestors' old stomping grounds in the northern England area. So yeah, that's it. That's my top 5.
All right. I guess
Going
I'll jump
bowling?
in. Yeah. So I started mine. It's a good segue into mine because I put my number 5. I should first say I wanted to go and pick like 5 just random territories of the U.S. and just like make that my list because I don't want to live anywhere besides here. But I didn't want to be too much of a party pooper, so I actually participated. But my list was more practical than your all's, I would say. Only have 2 non-English speaking countries on the list, which is number 5 is one of them. But the Vatican, because why not? There's only like 800 people that live there. I would be one of the, very few non-religious, one of the laity living there. And I did like that. I went and clicked on their Wikipedia page to see how many people live there. It had a breakdown by population. So it has like 200 clergy, 200 cardinals, 100 other religious, and then it has 1 pope. But yeah, Vatican starting the list at 5. New Zealand at 4. Again, English-speaking country. Very beautiful country. Not much to say. It seems to be a fairly well-run, contained island. So it's a good place to go. Norway, my other non-English speaking country, at 3. Very similar to Dustin. I had a friend in high school who was an exchange student from Norway. And so it sounded like a great place. And I at least know 1 person in the entire country. My last 2, I did not go the same way that Justin did, so all the UK hate mail can come to me. I just put the UK as a whole instead of breaking them into individual countries. So, yeah, watch out. English-speaking country, very similar culturally to us, and very, a lot of history that's related to us. And then number 1 went with Canada, just because it's the most similar to us overall. So if I have to go somewhere, may as well keep it as close as I can.
All right. So my top 5. Coming in at 5, I think I'm the only one with a South American country. I chose, well, actually, it's not south, I guess it's middle. I chose Costa Rica. Gorgeous, incredibly environmentally friendly, and, coffee. My number 4 is France.
Hey.
Food, just the culture, I think is wonderful. My number 3 is Norway as well. So really, I didn't know a lot about Norway until our youngest daughter went off to college, and one of her soccer teammates was from Norway and graduated, and has just flooded my Instagram with these amazing pictures of where she lives, and she was just the nicest human being I think I've ever met. So 3 was Norway. 4 was Italy, because I love pasta. Why not? And mozzarella and all that kind of stuff, and just, that'd be great. But my number 1 country, sort of similar to New Zealand, but Australia. And I've just always wanted to be there. I love the accent. I love all the critters that they have, and my grandparents visited there, used to go back a lot when I was a kid, and so they had lots of friends that would come to the States, and I've just always been enamored by the land down under.
So I will say I had Australia as number 5 on my list, and then I thought about spiders, and then they promptly were dropped.
Oh yes, I would never step foot. But I mean that place is scary. Everything is as big as you and can kill you. Have you seen the fox bats? I mean, how big they are.
Well, yeah, but all these places have Iceland, you freeze your tail off.
I would much rather do that than to fight a fox bat.
Probably completely harmless, but in the heart attack they're going to
They probably are, yeah.
And one bad thing about Iceland, which I was hoping I wouldn't have to mention, but in full disclosure, in the wintertime, you only get, I think, like 90 minutes of sunlight.
Oh.
It stays dark most of the time in the winter, like Alaska. So that's kind of
that's not depressing at all, is it?
You learn to love it.
Happiest. I guess it depends on which month they're polled on whether the happiest country or not.
Yeah.
Did Iceland get exposed to coronavirus?
Very little. They contain it pretty well.
Yeah. All right. So now we need to come up with a final list. So I think we had a lot of repeats. Canada has to be there. That was on everybody's list.
And Norway were either on every list or most of them.
Canada, Norway, and was France on multiple lists?
And that was
I had France.
France had 2. New Zealand
Canada,
had
Norway,
2.
France, New Zealand. So that's 4.
UK.
That's 5, isn't it?
UK had 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
it just rains so much there. It's gloomy.
It'll be fine.
So I had to really, so maybe it's just a girl thing, I don't know, but my first initial top 5 were all like islands.
Oh, really?
I tried really hard to get an island
area. And I was like, no, I sunburn too easy. I can't do all that.
That's why, islands and beaches, nothing of that interests me, because when I was a kid, I got sun poisoned when I went to one of those water theme parks, and that was on a shady day, a few hours, and that broke me from the sun. Like, I hate it. I want nothing to do with the sun anymore. So I will never put an island.
Do you ever go outside?
Very rarely. I'm basically a vampire. All right. So to recap, we've got Canada, Norway, New Zealand, France, and England. Was that?
Sure.
Since I had England and you had UK?
Let's call it UK.
Let's call it England. just so that we can say that I've got 2 from my list, but y'all dominated this one.
And I do want to make an observation that none of us selected a country from Africa or from Asia.
So I looked at that.
What are you saying, Dustin?
And here's the reason why I didn't, because there were some countries that kind of made my list. The level of poverty in those countries would make it really hard for me to live there and be able to enjoy the area. So
We are spoiled
Yeah,
first world citizens.
that too. Also,
And-
mine was very practical in terms of I don't know how to speak any language other than English.
Yes.
so.
Like I said, 80% of Sweden speaks English, and I think with Finland, 45% do. So mine was kind of practical too.
I will make some honorable mentions then, so that we maybe cover that. So because I did consider like Thailand or Vietnam or even Burma. You know, because there are some parts of those countries that are just completely stunningly beautiful, that are mostly untouched, you know, by civilization.
and amazing food.
Yeah, and even parts of Africa, like Namibia, I think, you know, we could get along pretty well in South Africa, but there are some parts, you know, Namibia is beautiful as well. So there are some honorable mentions.
Yeah.
So if it was places we wanted to visit, I would have had
Oh, yeah.
That'd have been different.
African countries on there. But when it came to
Mhm.
places that I wanted to live,
Hmm.
and two, it's just so hard to travel from some of those places back home. So
Good point. All right. Well, that will conclude us. Thank you, Mr. Keith, for joining us. This was a lively
Oh,
discussion.
Canada. Close with a rousing rendition of.
Yeah. We are going to get so much hate. If anyone
Yeah.
was actually watching this stuff and listening to this stuff, then we would get so much hate probably. But
this will be the
fortunately,
one.
this will be the one. Yeah, it'll go viral. All right. Well, peace be to everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks.